I feel like the allostatic load of trauma dips us into the trauma field of reality. It allows us to feel that and resonate with it. And they talked about how in open dialogue, every perception in the room matters. And he was talking about breathing and the mantra and how it's helpful for people. And I agree. And at the same time, it's important to have another way of living for somebody so they don't just keep co-creating the same reality, which is the traumatic world that we all live in. So it's amazing to decrease one's allostatic load so one can again function, but if it's a function that still co-creates the trauma of society, then the purpose of the trauma, the lesson of it, the value of it, the gift in it is not received. And he talked about how trauma impacts the autonomic nervous system. People that are traumatized, they have a faster heart rate, and it messes up the endocrine system as well. And I was talking about in other videos how a faster heartbeat is like fear. And so if the heart is beating in fear, one is going to be more aware. Things that are fearful will be more salient, and fear will be projected on things that are normally salient as something other than fear. So that's the importance of getting the allostatic load down, of not having stress, of not having cortisol. Cortisol attacks the hippocampus, and then we can't sort out the information coming in, and then we lose the sense of euphoric sensation and we feel scared all the time. So that's where fish oil comes in as well. I read in this document about the stages of psychosis and how people in the early stages of psychosis, their first episode, should just be given fish oil and other interventions. But it's not until like stage 2 or 3 that medication is even considered, and it at every stage it says the same above interventions plus, meaning fish oil still, fish oil, and this is like a document for psychiatrists, yet I was never told to take fish oil. And so I'm going to give that to my doctor and say, why aren't they giving fish oil as a first line of defense against this before antipsychotics? Why isn't fish oil given out in the psych ward? I've made a few items on a list for things that would actually be very easy to implement that might help a lot. And one thing they touched on as well is that an adolescent that goes into a distress state is often resonating with the state of distress of the entire family unit. And so this is kind of obvious, and this is also one of the reasons why they often use open dialogue in Finland for first break psychosis, because it's seen as something that's in the social fabric of a person, but it's not the person, it's not personal. And so I was thinking about even me or whoever, it's not even just the family unit, but that even extends into society. So a person that manifests, say, psychosis is manifesting collective distress of the family unit and society. Because, for example, if there's stress in the family unit, like the father is really angry and stressed all the time, and say they have a job out in society that makes them angry and stressed, well, that extends to society. So now the way society is structured has affected the dad, which is added to the collective stress of the family unit, which is the allostatic load, which then manifests in an adolescent. And that's not the only stress. There's other stressors too. The stressor of the adolescent being in society, in, say, the education system. So I don't think it's just a family unit. The fact that a person has a family makes it seem like, oh, this is the person that's manifesting it within the family unit. And it's partly the family, because if a person's stressed and distressed and they're not able to talk with their family, or they don't have a good relationship, but I don't think it's the family unit that causes it. It's just one person manifesting the collective distress, which means the person's distressed because everyone else is distressed, and they're also personally distressed because of their distress in the distress of the structure of their life and society, as well as the life and society of every family member in the unit. So if everybody in the family was super happy and everything with their life and the design of their life, then maybe the person wouldn't manifest that distress. But they could still have personal distress that would manifest it. But even if it's personal distress, because say somebody was bullied, again, that's the structure of society. And the way that we've trained people to be. So the fact that a person manifests that distress because of that it's not them again. So it's a collective thing that manifests in certain individuals. Just like the spiritual thing manifests in certain individuals. It doesn't mean that this person is more spiritual than other people. It just means that person has manifested that spiritual dimension sort of coming through them. But it's a dimension that any human being has access to. Just like any human being has access to being distressed, or any human being has access to being in so-called psychosis. It's not a personal thing. So even with the whole thing of open dialogue to support the family, to help the person integrate back in the family, it doesn't address the larger societal issues of why have we created such a sucky reality. There was a quote I read by somebody that said, if you want to solve the drug problem, make reality not suck. And that's kind of true. If reality didn't suck, people wouldn't do drugs to escape reality. So there's so many levels to it beyond that, and that's why I feel like if a person has open dialogue and they're able to integrate back into their family, that's great, but it doesn't address maybe the societal issues. It does subtly, because at least it gives a voice to somebody speaking and sharing, and they're able to speak openly, and that is just a change to begin with. And to have a whole family unit be able to operate in that way, that would definitely change things, for sure. So every little bit matters. I guess my brain usually just goes to the beyond of everything. They said the person is energetically showing the pain of the whole unit, and I thought a person can be energetically showing the pain of the whole entire planet, the whole world, not even just humanity, but the whole earth, Gaia, all of it. And they talk about not being medicated right away, so a person can actually look at the root cause of the issue. So if somebody's feeling distressed and then they're medicated right away, there's no way to actually talk about the issue. You still could, but it's not as powerful as getting at the root of the issue while a person's still in the distress and not numbed away from it. And they talked about how the one person in crisis is the sensitive empath in the group. And I think also, now that I'm thinking about it, if one person's manifesting the distress, that they're like channeling the distress in a way, they're concentrating it, and they can see it from all the different points around them, whether it's their family and society, and they're able to put a voice to that. But they're not listened to. It's seen as a personal problem, when really the ego is the person, it's the persona, and that's the thing that blocks this extra energy from coming in. And the energy can illuminate beautiful things, and it can also illuminate stressful things. It doesn't have the discernment, it doesn't have that blocking mechanism. The blocking mechanism is the ego, and when that's gone, it's just one process. The good is the bad. There's no demarcation between good and bad. It's just perception, and perception sees things without judging it, and it sees the energy of it, and it feels the energy of it, and then we feel that, and we're able to be either in distress or in ecstasy. And now the value in that is that seeing things as they are, and not as the ego thinks they should be, or in terms of the ego. So in that way, a person in that distress is a channel to be listened to about what needs to change and what needs to get better. So a person is able to see that. One is an empath, one can feel that, and it's taken on as, or it's seen as, a personal problem. Really, these people that feel these things are the solution. They're telling us what needs to be fixed without having to wait for 10 years for the scientific papers to be published. you really want to do science, take an empath, plunk them down in a situation, and tell them to let you know what they're sensing. It's like we create all these problems, and then we create all this science to try and figure out the problems that we created, and then we think that that's science. And he also mentioned that we become victims of our systems. That's sad. And the system funnels us into a perspective that is not accurate. And so I'd like to create a reverse funnel. A funnel that's actually fun. Funneling towards fun. He also mentioned that organizations get in the way. I agree with that too. I want this business to be a disorganization, which just means organizing in a way that's different than the organization of society. So it's something that helps to disorganize society and the organizations, in that it's restoring us to our learning and our creativity and our capacity, so we don't need organizations to create these big hoopla structures around trying to fix us. He also said stress is alien, and I agree with that in a way, because stress is mostly caused by thoughts, and thoughts are aliens. Thoughts are viruses. Thoughts are mind viruses. And I know he wasn't meaning it in that way, but thoughts are indeed viruses, and they've taken over our brain. And even if we're in extreme terror, we might think something about aliens, and then we might actually project seeing aliens because we're so terrified. So the mind really does produce what it is that we're resonating with, and we can actually project it outside of us and see it. People who so-called hallucinate all the time. If everybody was hallucinating in that way at the same time, it would actually be true. So it's a good thing we don't all believe in aliens at the same time, otherwise they would be here, because we would see, and then that's what would happen. And that's the thing too, is the healing. There needs to be some kind of healing from this system, but it's also healing for what? And I think that the altruism deals with the for what. So I might have talked about before, or I had a realization a couple years ago. I was being really healthy. I was eating super healthy, doing all this healthy stuff all the time. Healthy, 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 healthy. And I realized, what am I being healthy for? Am I being healthy to be healthy? And that really struck me as something I'd never really considered before. Because years ago, over 10 years ago, I had chronic fatigue syndrome, and it took me a while to be really healthy and then feel energetic again. And so I realized it's not as much about being healthy in terms of, eating perfectly healthy and taking a lot of vitamins. And even though I eat pretty healthy and I take some vitamins, my whole lifestyle doesn't need to be designed around getting vitamins and doing healthy things, because I actually spent time doing rolfing and colon hydrotherapy and all these healthy things to try and get healthier. So I was always trying to get healthier. And so again, that's kind of always about me and my health. And so I'd rather spend some of that energy on something else, like healthy for what? It's great to be healthy and have lots of energy, but what for? What am I going to use that energy for? It's not like I didn't have anything else in my life, but I realized that a lot of what I was doing was around being healthy. And actually, I feel like right now I could be a little bit healthier. I don't think there was a lot of value in being that healthy, because I have that context, I have that comparison to be like, ooh, my health, my physiology is lacking a little bit. But at the same time, I can also realize, well, I don't have to be perfect in that domain, because it costs more money and takes more energy in order to create that energy. So if I spend 2 hours a day on food prep and buying and making and all that stuff, I have 2 hours less to do something else. And I talked about before how I would go back to spending those 2 hours on health every day if I felt I needed to. But, from experiencing mania and things like that, energy doesn't have everything to do with food. That energy is like the energy of meaning and learning and being creative. So I feel like it's also important to have that dimension in my life of learning and being creative, and that gives me energy too. And I feel that meaning actually creates positive physiological changes within myself that make me healthy, instead of just thinking that physical things like exercise and food are what determine physical health. There's actually a lot of energetic things that determine physical health, like the things I mentioned. So that's again in line with embodying one's mania. Doing all those sort of manic traits and harvesting my mania would say, I don't have to be perfectly healthy. Actually, when I was in mania the very first time, I was raw vegan and I started to disappear. I went down to 90 pounds and I was eating and it would just go right through me, and I couldn't put any more physical mass on my body. So I actually feel like to have a bit of toxicity in me, to resonate with sort of the toxicity of society, kind of resonates with keeping an ego. To be too light and too healthy might not actually be that healthy for me at the moment. And I feel I want to change that at some point. But it's not necessary right now. I'm just saying that spending all that time on eating healthy to be healthy has nothing to do with connecting to my altruism. Though it's not necessarily true, because when I'm super healthy and vibrant, people notice and they ask me what I'm doing, and then I tell them, and then so it actually is kind of an embodied mania in a way, because people notice and then ask, and then they might actually implement something in their life. Like, I was eating super healthy, and one time I gave my friend an organic apple when we were rollerblading. And after that day, she told me she ate an apple every day. And before that, she didn't. And so I thought, me just giving it an organic apple, because I had one, because I was eating healthy, made a change in somebody. So it's a natural way, and that's why doing all this talking about stuff isn't really the natural way. I'm just really wanting to unfold this context for myself and talking about myself about it, maybe just talking myself into a different type of lifestyle. Putting happiness first. I talked about happiness first before, and I think naturally in my first recovery and rediscovery and recreation process, I just put happiness first. I just was happy. I chose to be happy. I didn't really have to do anything to make myself happy. I chose to be happy and was happy doing things like cleaning toilets and whatever I was tasked to do. And in that way, the meaning could actually be in the most meaningless things. So that's why I feel like putting the altruism first is sort of the for what. Somebody can heal and then become altruistic, or one can become altruistic, and just being that way can actually be healing, because it would create physiological changes for sure. There's a quote in the Happy movie that says, the fastest way to be happy is to do something for someone else. And I hope this is actually doing something for someone else, because I don't have to record this. I feel like I want to for some reason. He talked about the importance of being content, and I can see that as the hippocampus would be more intact if we're not stressed, and it's not getting attacked by whatever stress molecules. And I hope actually that whatever it is I'm going to create starting next year is just really fun and happy and playful, and it's almost like created by play, and maybe created by just being really silly. Like, let's be ridiculous, what can we create? And being fun, and that way it's self-sustaining without having to coerce people to be there. And they talked about how being labeled by the system makes you powerless. And I was thinking about if we're able to label ourselves, maybe we'll create a new system. And I was thinking about in terms of the business, if you come into the business, well, what is your position? Make up a label, make up a name. It can be conscious astronaut miracle creator. And a person just made their position and their name, and now whatever it is they're going to create is kind of in the context of that. So they'll create the system, they'll create the business based on partly on their own labels, and part of it would be creating language and lingo too. And it would be important to inquire, which he mentioned is looking inward, and I didn't really realize that. Inquire versus enquire, because enquire is what Krishnamurti talks about a lot of times, and it's looking inward. And I feel like inquiry would be really important in harvesting one's mania and manic lifestyle design, as well as creating the business. And I feel that's really important for me because I have all these thoughts and ideas, but what part do I really want to do? What is my part to do? And I talked about how I'm not really a business person and I'm not super great with people. And the part about not being great with people might be, if you watch these videos, the stuff I want to talk about is kind of weird. It's kind of out there. It's kind of nothing to do with something that was on TV yesterday. I don't watch TV. I don't watch any of that stuff. And so it makes me kind of an alien. And so when I meet up with people, I don't have a common context through which to relate. And so that might make it seem like I'm not the greatest with people sometimes when I do care deeply about people. And I feel like I need to just go back to being a crazy person. So I'm crazy enough to think that I can change the world. He also mentioned something I've read before, that natural leaders give power back to their teammates and their colleagues, and that would be part of this business, is that other people have the power. I feel there's a system of humanity different from the systems created by the ego. So the inner human dimensions would create different systems that were actually in alignment with what it is to be human, which isn't a system at all. It's a living thing. It's a living system. The whole world is a living system, and we're living systems within that living system, and we're out of whack with the living system. And to me, this is kind of the gap, is to get humanity, the living system of humanity, in alignment with the living system of the world, not just the systems of humanity or the systems created with the ego. So there's the person, the family, the system, the society, and there's also the world, the earth. They also talked about how in Brazilian Spiritism, that suppressed mediumship is the largest cause of psychological distress. And that makes it sound really fancy, and I feel that really boils down to the fact that a person gets in touch with their intuition. They can see things beyond the logic of the ego, which isn't very logical. It's talking about days past, whereas when that weakens, a person can actually see what's right in front of them and make educated guesses and hypotheses and intuitions and recognize patterns about it, which is actually not that miraculous. So to call it mediumship makes it sound fancy. I just feel that mediumship is actually normal. It's what happens when we're really in touch with what's going on right now. And most of us aren't in touch with that. And then we think that a person is a medium when they get into touch with that. And my thing is actually that, and it could be part of this business, that one day people that are in touch with their intuition, so-called mediums, will actually help people that aren't, in a way that is like, okay, hello, you're lost in illusion, you're hallucinating, your ego is thinking again, and you're thinking about yourself 10 years ago. Like, that's a hallucination. It has nothing to do with right now. So I think that it's really up to us who have connected with that and who are able to integrate that to help other people who think they're normal and living in a normal world, but it's not. It's an egocentric world, which is complete disorder and delusion. And the people that are trying to help us are suppressing us. And if we were able to integrate, they would actually want to know what our secret was. So their delusion actually depends, as well as their paycheck, depends on us not getting it together, not getting together and starting to co-create a different world. And they also talked about bearing witness to so much suffering while mending the gap. That's one of the things I struggle with, and I've talked about on other videos how I really have trouble supporting others in the system because I see so many things in the system that are wrong, that are traumatizing. And maybe I'm also sensing a person's being traumatized by it, and they might not even be aware of it themselves. So it bothers me because a person within the system is thinking something's wrong with me, and I'm trying to support them, yet I see the system element that is harming them, and maybe even feeling that they're being harmed, and the person doesn't know where this harm is coming from. Was coming from the system that is supposed to be helping. And then the person is taking it on themselves that something's wrong with them. And I really struggle with that. And that's the thing, I think there's so many congruencies. Well, it's not really congruent, but the system says there's nothing wrong with you. It's not your fault. You have a mental illness. Like, it's a disease. It's a medical problem. When I would say there's nothing wrong with you, it's the system, it's society. There's something a little bit wrong with everyone, and accumulated, it's manifesting in certain people. And so it's not the person's fault, but not because it's some kind of medical problem. It's everything else. So they're right when they're saying there's nothing wrong with you. It's not your fault. It's just when they start to say it's your own brain. And maybe it could be a medical problem in that a person is sensitive. Their brain has, the brain dis-ease is that they become sensitive to seeing all this crap around us all that nobody else can see, or not everybody can see and feel. And it's not just about seeing it. It's you start to begin to actually feel it. And that is the distressing part, is feeling it. And a lot of it is not knowing where it's coming from. Well, it's coming from the collective. And certain people are able to numb themselves out more and more and more, but it eventually accumulates in someone else. So by a person numbing out, it actually accumulates in someone else. And I'm not trying to say it's some like mysterious substance. It's just if somebody is not actually acting and moving towards resolving things, that collective disorder, it gets transferred somewhere else. And he did talk about staying within the system to change it. So I guess I will do that for a while, at least. I feel like it's too much compassion. And he talked about CBT being changed the way you behave to change the way you think. And I've talked about before how this energy of mania is sort of like CBT in a way. It makes you act in a different way. So if you're acting all kind and doing all these things, then you're going to think in a certain way. If you're acting so godlike, you're going to start to think that you're God. If you're like not thinking about yourself and only doing things for other people. So I think mania is like the CBT of the universe. It animates us in a different way. I think there's some trauma to falling out of the space where we feel like we're able to change the world. So it's not just about healing personal trauma to be able to operate in the world of trauma, but it's also about restoring oneself to feeling like one can do something about this world. And he said an effort to find an answer creates a shift in consciousness. So if one's trying to find the answer to solving the world's problems, it's also going to create a shift in consciousness. And why should we aim for anything lower than that? And I also realized that the ego is life by proxy. It's not actually life. The ego is like a proxy service. I also wrote down that it's not personal mental illness, it's human spiritual illness. So we're not connected to that meaning and that spiritual dimension of ourselves. And spiritual, even that term can be broken down. To me, laughter is one of the most spiritual things, and it's also one of the most human things. And the more ego we have, more often, the less laughter we have. So I feel spiritual isn't necessarily spiritual in the sense that we tend to think about it. It's spiritual in that these are just our dimensions as human beings. Laughter, play, all those things we are as children. Children are like the most spiritual things, and they don't think they're spiritual. And so, like, you wouldn't, if you stayed a child forever, you'd never need to meditate. You'd never need to sit there and breathe. You would just be a human being. So that's why I feel like those dimensions we are as children, plus altruism, are really what spirituality is all about, instead of just using the word spiritual. Spiritual could be thought of as light, or making things lighter, which is like laughter and different oxytocin and bonding experiences. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone, and when there's more of us bonded together, all of our loads are lighter. And I talked about before how the brain is kind of like a spaceship. It's moving us through space and time. And when we go into this transformative process and this manic energy comes in, or this other energy, it changes the course, it changes navigator of our brain spaceship. We're somewhere else, we're doing other things, we're animated in different ways. And this energy gets our brain spaceship into trouble. It gets it landed in some kind of maintenance dock, and then installing other programs that get us to just sit around and feel sorry for ourselves, and feel sad about ourselves, and feel like other people are stigmatizing us and everything, when that is true. But we still need to take steps to show the world that that's not who we are. That's not who we thought we were before we were diagnosed. If it was, we would have walked ourselves to the clinic, to a doctor, to tell us that. We would have known. That's kind of what they're trying to train us to do, is, oh, I have this and this and this. Oh, I better go see a doctor and get medicated. And so I would like to talk about all the opposite stuff and have the brain spaceship, again, even if it's medicated into a chemical ego band-aid, able to do small things to eventually be able to break away from that. And even now, I'm on medication, and it keeps my brain spaceship going in a certain pattern. And that's useful for now, but there may come a time when I want to break away from that and see what happens. I also had the thought that it would be cool to learn from some elders, because I'm sure they know all this stuff. They understand it, and they'd be able to talk about it a lot better than I'm able to guess at. And I think too that one of the things they likely have, and I don't really know anything, is that the connection to the earth and nature. So it's one thing to try and change the structure of society through my stuff, talking about embodying one's mania and all that, but it's another thing to reconnect with the earth too, which is super important. And in my mind, we are the native people too. We're not separate from them. We're like, they were here and then we were here, but where did we come from? Apparently somewhere else on the earth. And we came in here and like destroyed everything, but we're really destroying ourselves. It's like we came with the ego and they didn't have that. And we've created this mess, and we don't know how to uncreate it. when the people that got trampled on are the ones that know and understand. And they're labeled with a lot of mental illness stuff too. So maybe that's the commonality. It's the people with the mental illnesses, supposed mental illnesses, see it this way. Doesn't matter what culture. It's like the uniting of the common humanity.